How many do we have, Doug? 10 or 12, 15? What do you got?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll tell you when we're done.
Okay. We'll see if they hang up.
That's it. They tend to stay in. So, okay, 1 o'clock, I'm going to start. So we're about there.
Okay, hit it. Hit the button. Yeah.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to this edition of LeaderConnect. And this is a webinar designed to connect you to the right people and resources to help your ministry go deeper and farther. It's a real pleasure for us to have Jack Hamilton on this webinar today. And we're going to be talking about a topic that I think is going to be extremely helpful to a number of you. But before we get there, let me just remind you that all of these LeaderConnect webinars are available on the TM website. So if you missed last week's, for example, which was Reaching Lost People, you can go on the website, you can type videos in the search bar, and you'll find the conversation that took place between David Harris and Neil Benson, Ken Primo, and Aubrey Barnwell about reaching lost people. Next week, we're going to be closing out the spring session, but a very important one, especially for a number of you, as we talk about pastoral successions and how do you plan for that and what kinds of things do you need to keep in mind. But today, we are going to focus on a topic that I think any of you who've been in ministry for a number of time and have worked with teams have had to wrestle with. And that is, do we develop someone or do we just need to replace them? And Jack is going to be going through a number of questions with us. And then obviously there's going to be all kinds of questions that you may have that will be coming in. Let me just remind you that you can type in thoughts and comments in the chat section. If you have questions, I would really encourage you to use the Q&A. We'll monitor them and then we will try to get those to Jack to make sure that your questions that maybe aren't directly answered can be spoken to. So Jack, it's good to have you. I was asking you about the picture behind you, and that is Cal Ripken, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. And why do you have Cal Ripken up there?
I think longevity, he had 2,131 consecutive games he showed up. Which was pretty impressive. And to me in baseball, Doug, I don't think that record's ever going to be broken. They're all different.
That seems like one of those that's going to stand a long, long time.
Yeah, it's going to be around a while.
I think the old timers look at today's players and go, they're a bunch of wimps. They just kind of sit on the sideline for any number of reasons. Man, it's so good to have you. A lot of us who are on the call know you. We've had conversations with you. We understand a little bit about your history. But could you share with us, just as a reminder for those who may not know you, as well as I have the privilege of knowing you, your involvement at High Desert Church, what you did over the years, what you're doing right now?
Yeah, went to High Desert Church in 1984. The crazy connection there is, I grew up a pagan and a heathen and was led to the Lord by a youth pastor. And that youth pastor was my senior pastor's dad, Tom Mercer's dad. Frank was my spiritual father. And Tom and I have been friends, not real good friends in 1969, but friends, and then became closer friends in different ministries. I was one and he was in Upland. And I actually I don't even know, Doug, if I ever told you, I'm the one that got him the job at High Desert.
Yeah, you did mention that.
Yeah. And so I was an administrator of a Christian school. Had a couple of hundred high school kids. Tom would come and speak at the high school, and a guy named Jack Rance, I think it was Jack Rance, was that
yes, it was
at High Desert Baptist, and he was going up to Henderson or Las Vegas or something, and I invited Tom to come over and speak at our high school chapel. I invited two of the search committee from High Desert Baptist Church to come over and listen to Tom, Bud and Dorothy, and they came over and heard him, I think in October of 83, and extended a call to him in February of 84. And then I came on board at the end of October of 84. So he preceded me by about 8 months and kind of off and running. And about January of 2020, I became 1/4 time. So I'm doing that, but I've done some other things now, Doug. I have different guys that I'm coaching and mentoring officially as a ministry. And then I still do, I still have my mentor group with TM. I got 10 senior pastors in there. I'm still on the board at Forest Home. I just finished 9 years on the board at Fellowship Monrovia.
Wow.
My last meeting there in February.
Okay.
And just a lot of things like that. I'm part of a new ministry called Kingdom One. Sometime it'd be fun to share that with you as well. But anyway, I'm still, I want to die with my boots on. How's that?
You sound like Cal Ripken. That's great.
Yeah.
Love it. Gosh, so let's dive into the subject. And it's one that I think a number of people have had to wrestle with at one time or another. You sent me kind of some questions that we're going to be talking about. You can talk a little bit more about those questions.
Sure.
But you entitled it the Develop or Replace Conundrum.
Yes.
Yeah, and talk to us about what that means. What is the Develop or Replace Conundrum?
Yeah, what it is, Doug, I think, as you stated, all of us in leadership at times, when we work with a staff, we have to decide if this person, the staff member, he or she is worth keeping and developing versus maybe releasing and replacing them. And it is a conundrum. I don't think that the issue ever goes away. I don't think it's ever easy, but what I thought would be appropriate today is to go over 7 questions that might help those that are listening in today to determine what to do in regards primarily, really, is this person a person that I might need to release? And when you think about it, Doug, and I know you know this, and all our folks that are on the webinar know it as well, but I really, the whole thing is about getting the right people on your staff, and we're big fans of Jim Collins. He wrote Built to Last and Good to Great and Mighty, How the Mighty Fall. And he uses that term, develop or replace conundrum, because we all have to deal with that. And I honestly think the most important skill for all of us in building a great church is making good, kind of superb people decisions. And without the right people on the bus, if we can use that expression, you simply, in my opinion, can't build a great church. And again, that sounds a little bit arrogant because it's all ultimately up to God and the Holy Spirit. But I mean, that's our human side of that is a big one. And we need to know, really, when we're working with staff, when we shift from developing someone and shifting into that replacing them. And there's no simple right answer there. I honestly, to come up with a formula, I think would be a little bit naive and crazy in that sense, because it just doesn't, it's interesting in Collins' work, Doug, he studied all these companies and he mentions 10 companies, and it was a 50-50 split. Those that would replace and those that would release. And they were both successful. He looked at these 10 corporations and it was an even split. And I thought that was fascinating. One of the things,
Jack, just to stop, you said replace or release. Do you mean develop or replace?
I'm sorry. Yeah, develop. Yeah, develop or release.
Right.
I use release and replace together. Same idea.
Right.
But I think that it's interesting, I was reading some stuff by Dan Ryland, who's a very, gifted communicator and kind of a lifelong executive pastor. Now he's down at 12 Stone. And it was fascinating to me. He said that you have a staff that 30% of them, what he would call high capacity, high competency leaders, 30 of them, almost like the stars on your team. And then he said about 60% of them are the kind of the steady eddies, doing a good job, satisfactory. But he says there's that 10% factor. There's always that component, whatever percentage we want to assign to it, of people that might need to be more development, or maybe even considered that we release them.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, in my time when I've worked with a lot of executive pastors, Doug, I've asked that question sometimes in seminars or times that we've been meeting together, asking them a question: which mistake would you naturally drift to? Would you drift towards keeping somebody too long and and know, and then it turned out bad, or
Right.
maybe you're having regret that you let somebody go too quickly.
Yeah.
And honestly, you know the answer to that. I think everybody that might be listening would say probably the mistake that most of us would make is probably keeping somebody too long.
Yeah.
And I would say 90% of the guys, if I ask them to raise their hand, that would be the answer that they
Yeah.
would have. The majority of folks, would have followed that option. And that's probably good in a way, because we're people that care about people. We have a heart for people, and we know we're messing with people's families and their lives if we have to replace them.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that conundrum is there, though, developing them or replacing them.
Well, and then Jack, when you think of what's involved in hiring someone, and sometimes you're asking them to move, like you mentioned family, you're asking the family to move.
Yeah.
You feel responsible for bringing the person there, and then you go, gosh, I don't want to just let this person go right now for any number of reasons. So all of those factors, come into play. But I think maybe there'll be a little bit of time along the conversation where I'd love to have you weigh in on what about some of the things that you've learned about hiring good people, like little
Sure.
tips, things maybe that we haven't thought of. But before we get there, you mentioned Jim Collins. He's given these great questions. Why don't you start with the first one? And are you beginning to lose other people by keeping this person in the seat? Talk to us a little bit about that one.
Okay, let me inject one thing
Please.
first. I would call that 1B.
Okay.
Again, I don't want to over spiritualize this, Doug, but I would say 1A, honestly, before we even consider the 7 questions that we stole from Jim Collins, would be prayer. And we read in the book of James, he tells us, if any of you lacks wisdom, what? We're to pray.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about releasing somebody, especially that side of the two-pronged equation there, that better be something that you're really prayed up about. And I do believe God gives us wisdom in these matters when we have to make that tough decision. He tells us he'll give it to us generously there. So I would go 1A, then 1B.
Yeah. And I just want to stop there and thank you for underscoring that and reminding us that it's not as easy as just jumping into 7 questions that a great secular author can pose for us. There is that spiritual dimension. We do have the wisdom that God gives. The Holy Spirit will provide insight. Thank you so much so that's where we start. We start with prayer.
Amen.
But
I would believe with that. Yeah. And I just, I that's my 1A to these 7 questions, because that is number 1.
Yep.
The Doug asked us, you guys and gals, are you beginning to lose other people by keeping that person in the seat? Now, Jim Collins talks a lot about getting the right people on the bus, getting the right people in the right seat on the bus. So, that's all there. And by the way, the 7 questions that we're going to talk today will be mailed out to you at the end of our time. So don't worry too much if you miss some of the wording. But that's the first thing. Are we losing people because we've kept somebody else on the bus that maybe shouldn't be on the bus? And I really believe this. I think your best staff won't want to work with others that don't work hard and have good attitudes. And you'll find if you don't deal with that, you might be losing some of your best people because of their having to work with someone else on the staff that's not holding up their part of the deal. And if not, again, you know this even when it comes to church services, people vote with their feet. And if you find some of your good staff members leaving, there might be a reason related to other staff members that maybe shouldn't even be on this bus. And I also think, too, as a side point, Doug, I think that's kind of true for volunteers as well. I think if you're working as a staff member with a bunch of volunteers and you're finding more and more of those volunteers quitting and not staying in that world, often it's because of the staff member that leads them. A lot of people will volunteer to be in a particular ministry with a particular staff member, but I honestly think what keeps them there is that staff member's relationship to them. And if that's not healthy and positive and good, people will come and go from that particular ministry in the church. And again, if staff members are losing heart because of this one staff member, we have a problem. It's a serious problem, and there's no better way to destroy your staff culture than allowing for that situation to exist. So I would say that's the first thing when we start thinking about this conundrum. Is it replacing this person or deciding if we're going to keep them and develop them? If people on the bus are starting to bail out, then that might be one indicator, Doug, that it might be time for us to deal with that individual and potentially even releasing them.
So Jack, this may be answered in the course of looking at the rest of the questions that you're going to talk about.
Yeah.
And if it is, let's just put a hold on it. But I think all of us have had people that have come on, and there's been, a little bit of a new methodology, or they're just not the old person. What's the difference between the person that is kind of driving people away and what I'm just going to call the adjustment factor to a new person coming onto a staff or, onto the team?
My first reaction to that is time.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about it a little bit more
Okay.
at the end. But I think the other thing that I would be careful of here, if we have people leaving the staff team because of maybe a particular staff member, and maybe you're being fed this information from staff members that are upset with this individual or whatever. A couple of my driving verses for ministry, I think, come out of the old Living Bible about only a fool listens to one side of the story.
Yeah.
And only a fool decides a matter before he's gathered all the facts.
Yeah.
Those are two good principles that I think all of us need to practice, because I think all of us could probably name different times when we were naive and maybe a little simple and listened to only one side of the story. I just had a friend that was released from his church last Tuesday, and he wrote me in a text, and it said they didn't listen to the whole story. And I thought, well, we haven't talked since then. That was just a few days ago. But I thought, that's interesting. Now, maybe he's wrong. I don't know. But again, there's always
the importance of doing that. That's right.
There's an important thing when we talk about maybe keeping the person here or, on that seat in the bus.
Yeah.
The second one.
Go to the second question.
Yeah. It just says another one that Collins would use. Do you have a values problem, a will problem, or a skill problem? And that to me is the question: can they or will they? Those are attitude kinds. Do we give that person a short rope or kind of a long runway with a long rope? And I do think it's important for us, Doug, to identify our values and maybe articulate them better than most of us do. We have our corporate values. It's truthful, helpful, enjoyable, and we added one probably after the first three, and that was just durability. Yeah. And that was kind of that longevity component that we wanted to develop among our team. But about 21 years ago, I developed some staff values. And those are those guiding, they're almost like overarching principles of how we're going to relate to one another internally. And the average person might not even know that comes to our church what those are. But I think those are kinds of things that if I have someone on the team that doesn't manifest those 8 qualities, then it might be another indicator that it's a values problem. Real quickly for me, Doug, those 8, the first one is humor, sense of humor. If somebody doesn't have a sense of humor, they won't last long at our church. And I would even say that maybe that gets easily offended by sense of humor.
Yeah.
That it's not a good thing. Second one's informality, just the way we deal with each other, titles, the way we operate, the way we dress, a lot of those kinds of components. Another is servant-heartedness. We know what that means. Another one's simplicity. I've always appreciated Saddleback because they really try to practice simplicity. There's not a lot of complication in their growth tracks, not a lot of complication in their base paths. It's very basic stuff. And I think teachability, teamwork, that one there, authenticity, flexibility, and faithfulness. The faithfulness to one another is a big one to me too. And that's really not, people say, well, you have a faithful one. Everybody wants to be faithful to God. I want you to be faithful to God, but that's not what I'm talking about. It's faithful to one another, Doug, where it's more that Matthew 18 principle, where it talks about if your brother has offended you, do what? You go to him in private, win your brother. Right. And so I don't want somebody coming to me complaining about you until they've talked to you. And so if they know that, I think it builds loyalty, because I'm not listening to trash talk about you from somebody else until they've talked to you. And so I think those are kind of what I would call our staff values. And I think these people need to buy into both the corporate and staff values. And if that's true, I actually think we can be more patient with that staff member trying to determine if they're going to be replaced or not, if they buy into who we are as a team. And they must have that will to improve and get better at their role. And the other thing that happens sometimes is you'll have somebody that maybe will lose the will to develop over time. And I'm not just saying because of age, but I've seen that be a factor as well, where they've just lost the will to develop and grow, and they become stagnant, in my opinion.
Yeah. Jack, of these three, a values problem, a will problem, or a skill problem, does one of them seem to be harder to develop than the others?
I think it sounds kind of weird in a way. The easiest one in some ways to develop is skill. Because
unless you're a worship leader and can't really carry the tune.
That's what I'm saying. It might vary according to each job description.
Yeah.
But I do think there's some things that we can do to help people develop their skills, where if they have a will problem, that's kind of an attitude thing. And it's tough sometimes to change an attitude. You know what I mean? I was talking to, I had dinner last Friday night when you guys were doing Mustard Seed Faith with Dr. Eric Tonnes from Biola and his wife, Donna. And Donna said something that really just struck me. We were talking about some of the issues that we're all facing now with theological things, maybe at colleges, universities, at camps, churches. You get someone to sign a statement of faith and they say they agree to it, and then they go on social media and affirm something that's contrary to what they say they affirm. And she was saying it's amazing to her, because she works with a lot of college students, how kids can say they believe a certain statement of faith, a doctrinal statement, but then turn right around and affirm someone that's not practicing that. And she said it's weird to her. And it is interesting. I've noticed that too, especially with maybe our Gen Z group, where they'll say they believe certain things, and then when it comes to the truth of friendship or whatever, it becomes mixed up. So it was just interesting.
Let's go on to the next one. This is fascinating. What's the person's relationship to the window and the mirror? What does that mean?
I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Collins makes a lot of reference to window and mirrors. And he talks about the window and mirror maturity. That's what I would call it. It's the idea when things go well, the leader points out the window, giving credit, and takes little credit for what has happened well. He looks through the window, or she looks through the window and sees what other people have done and made something successful. And then he says, when things go awry, they don't blame the circumstances or other people. They point to the mirror and say, I am responsible, asking what could I have done to make this better? So that's the mirror and the window idea. So when I look out the window, I'm giving credit. When I look at the mirror, I'm evaluating my own leadership and deciding what I could have done or couldn't have done or shouldn't have done, perhaps, to make the situation better. And I like that illustration. And if someone's always looking out the window to explain away problems or blame others, will never grow. I don't think they'll grow in their leadership, because it's all about my own development. I am responsible. What could I have done better to make this situation, be solved or better? And I like that illustration. So you have to ask about the person we're thinking about replacing or, trying to develop. Are they a person that looks at the mirror, or are they kind of a person that looks at the window?
Yeah, or so we give away credit when something's successful and we take the blame when it doesn't work.
Exactly, Doug. That is exactly what he's talking about.
Give us the next one.
Does a person see work as a job or a responsibility? And I think most of us are familiar with that idea. You know, the right people understand they don't just have jobs, they have responsibilities. And they understand the difference between kind of a to-do list and a checkoff system. And really the ultimate thing is their responsibility to make sure that happens the way it should be happening. It's interesting when I talk to I have 2 of my 3 adult kids are school teachers, and there's a big difference, I think, in teachers. You know, they both know that their job is not just showing up and being there 8 to 3 every day, but they need to take responsibility to make sure each of those kids are learning, not just a checkbox. You know, they did this, did that, and so forth. It's more than that task list. We got to be able to take responsibility for that. And I think we could take that across the board almost in any job, but in ministry, it's really true. You know, a school teacher, we could probably pick many vocations and see that that's also true in those as well.
Yeah, yeah. So give us just flesh out a position at the church, and what would it look like for the person to take that position as a job, and what does it look like when they're taking it as a responsibility?
I would even say, Doug, it could even be as simple as a youth pastor. I mean, his job is to make sure those kids are reaching their worlds for Christ, our mission statement, also growing in their faith, not just putting on the programs, not just saying we're going to do Wednesday night, Sunday morning, doing camp. That's checking the box to me. But it's the deeper purpose, the deeper meaning, you know, it's a responsibility to take some ownership in the fact that you are, to a certain degree, held responsible for those kids to grow in their relationship to Christ.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Rather than all the activity kinds of things that we naturally tend to think of when in that role.
Yeah. Jack, would you see that, let me see if I can ask the question in a helpful way, that the higher the role, or the bigger the role is that someone has at the church, the more they need to have a sense of responsibility. Whereas if they're a church, especially like High Desert, you know, you've got a lot of different positions. Are there places there that are more like jobs, where people like, here's the 4 things I'm expected to do, as opposed to I'm really responsible for the well-being of this group of people?
Yeah, I think that's a good insight, Doug. I really think that's true. That's why I think a lot of people don't understand the weight and the burden of being a senior pastor. And it could be in a smaller body, a medium size, or a larger one. If that lead is really leading, he does carry the burden and the responsibility of the church and the people. And I'm not minimizing the children's pastor or the small groups pastor or whatever, but I'm just saying it's there. And it's hard to walk away from, because if they have that calling on their life and the Lord's tapped them on the shoulder and say, we want you to be the lead of that ministry and that body of believers, I do think it's more there. Now you could go all the way down to, maybe a custodian or something, Doug.
Right.
You know, he has to clean this and that and do that. That's obviously more task driven. But even there, I would want that guy to think, hey, I want our campus to look great. I want it to be, something that people are proud of.
I was with Dane Ocker last Tuesday night. I stopped by and spent a little bit of time with him, and met him at the church. And he took me on a tour of the church. And during COVID, 2 custodians basically took responsibility to paint it all, to put up pictures. I'll tell you, it is incredibly winsome, attractive, welcoming at this point. And I said, he just described it. Yeah, these 2 guys just got it and they went for it, and we kind of empowered them. It's just so much what you're saying in terms of they feel responsible to make that building a workable place. And man, did they hit it out of the park. So really, really cool. Yeah.
That's a perfect example of what I'm saying, because you know what I mean? There was just, if you want to call it ownership in what you're doing, the responsibility part is really there. But I just think that if I'm working with a staff member that's maybe a little bit on the bubble, do we think about replacing them or trying to help them, develop them as a leader.
Yeah.
And if they don't have that responsibility component, that's just another indicator to me. Maybe it's time for them to be released.
Yeah. I want to pick up the last three questions, but before we do that, let me simply invite those of you who are watching to feel free to share your own questions. We'll make sure that Jack gets those, or if you have a comment that you'd like to share, we welcome those as well. But let's move on. Questions. Has your confidence in the person gone up or down in the past year?
Yeah, I think that's as Collins gives us that question, it to me, it's just like the stock market. It kind of goes up and goes down, and we kind of lose confidence. Yeah. And we lose confidence as time goes on. And, certain companies, maybe it's the same thing with certain staff members. I think the critical variable there is almost trajectory, if I can use that word. Which way are they going? And am I more confident if I sit down there with them and have that one-to-one conversation, trying to help them a little bit, and we meet together and they say, okay, Jack, I've got it. And do my worries disappear, or am I still thinking that out there? Right. Do I still have to have that constant need to follow up with them? Because they might say to me, I got it. Yeah. And then you think, nah, I don't think so. But anyway, I just think it's which direction are we going with that person? What's happened in the last, few weeks and stuff like that. So I would just say trajectory to me is the word there.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm assuming that when they talk about confidence, that could be confidence in any one of the areas of concern. So it's like their skill or their will or whatever that would be. Yeah.
Right. Good. Right.
Okay, talk to us about the next question.
Yeah, the question I think all of our probably listeners have dealt with before. The question is, do you have a bus problem or a seat problem? So do we want to keep this staff member on the bus, but maybe give them a new assignment, a new bus seat, rather than to release them? And sometimes the right person on the bus may have the wrong seat, Doug. You know what I mean? Sometimes there's another one that we've experienced. As the church has grown over the years, the ministry may outgrow that person's capabilities. Yeah. You know what I mean? To be the right person on the seat. Sure. And it just fascinating. And that is a really problem for me, because, maybe somebody's been with you, very faithful, very godly, good attitude, all of the things, support the values, everything, but they're not as gifted to lead at that level that they might have been before. There's a funny story. It's kind of related to this, but probably 7 or 8 years ago, we were looking for a junior high director for the Victorville campus. We had 7 different individuals come in and meet with us, speak to Wednesday night junior high kids, and trying to figure out who God would want us to extend a call to, and 7 different ones. And I remember one, a good person, good leader, relatively good communicator, but he's not the one we chose, because I really felt like his giftedness was probably for a group of about 50 junior high kids, where we were running 150 to 200 on Wednesday night with probably 40 volunteers. You know what I mean? And he just didn't. I honestly, too, Doug, I believe spiritual gifts are quantitative. Let me come back to that. But I recommended him to another church, this young man that we did not choose. He's at another church now, and he's really kicking butt. He's got about 50 in his junior high group, and really doing a good job from what his lead pastor tells me. Yeah. But he couldn't probably do what we needed him to do in our Victorville High Desert Church. Yeah. And I do think it's quantitative. And what I mean, it's kind of funny to me. Here's my bias. All you guys out there will shoot me. But when you interview somebody, it's funny now in the world that we're in, they'll give you their Enneagram number. They'll give you their DISC, letter. They'll give you their strength, top 5 strengths finder. They'll maybe even way back when they used to do the TJTA. And I'll say, well, what's your spiritual
gift? Has kind of fallen to the bottom, hasn't it? In everything.
Oh yeah, it has. Yeah. But I said, what's your spiritual gift? And they can't tell me.
Yeah.
I'm thinking to myself, that's the most biblical thing that we should know.
Right.
You know what I mean? But they can give me their Enneagram number and they can give me those other things. And I'm thinking, well, you know, 1 Corinthians 12 has a list, and Romans 12 has a list, Ephesians 4 has a
Yeah.
list.
Yeah.
And you're telling me you can't tell me. And I'm thinking,
Yeah.
it makes me laugh almost.
Yeah.
But my point is, I think it's quantitative. And what I mean by that, Doug, I even think it's true for lead pastors. I think some lead pastors can do a home run job with a church of 500.
Yeah.
Others a church of 300, others with 1,000, whatever. And I know guys, if I said to you, Doug, who has the gift of evangelism? Most of us would probably point to Billy Graham or what's at Harvest, Greg Laurie, or something like that. But I have a guy in our church that has probably led 1, 2, 3 people to the Lord every year.
Well,
I believe he has the gift of evangelism.
I would say so.
Yes,
Yeah.
but it's not thousands.
Right.
So I believe it's a bit of a quantitative thing. And then even take the gift of administration in Romans 12. I do believe that some guys can administer a church of 500, but they might not be able to do a church of 3,000.
Yeah.
And so let's say that's a quantitative gift. So when I think about a seat problem or whatever, it might even be that this portion of the ministry that person has been giving some oversight to has really outgrown them.
Yeah.
In that sense. And now maybe there's ways we can deal with that by bringing someone alongside of them to support them, you know, maybe an administrative assistant full-time. There's just different things. But
Yeah.
I do think that's something we have to decide. Is it a seat problem or is it a bus problem?
Yeah. Yeah. Would you say that if it's a seat problem, that typically the values and the attitude, the will, are going to be in the right place? It's more of a question of whether their skill set matches up for what they're being asked to do in that particular seat.
Yes. And again, if they don't have the skill set in that seat, and if they have the other two things in a positive way, I'd like to keep them.
Yeah. Talk to us about the last one.
I think that was the one that struck me kind of funny. It's how would you feel if the person quit? How would you feel if the person? If you're secretly relieved, you might already know if you have the right person or not.
Yeah.
If there's that relief to you, and if you're sad and distraught, then you might well believe that he or she is still the right person. And they might be. So in my mind, Doug, as I'm thinking about, do I release this person? Do I replace them? Or do I keep them and try to help them be what God wants them to be in this role? Then all 7 of these hopefully can give us some help making that decision. Yeah. It's still, there's no formula, there's nothing there. But when I see these questions and I look at these, Doug, I think those can help us make that decision.
Yeah. Jack, is there one that just stands out to you over the course of years in your own kind of decision-making process, with staff, in terms of, is there one of these questions that's probably been the linchpin for you more than any other?
I don't know. I'd say 2 or 3 of them, but number one was one, if I have other people that are bailing out on us because of this one, and even the last one here, Doug, how do I feel if the person quit? I would say that's a big one too. But I would even see on that will question, honestly, I think 1 or 2 times in the 35 years, the person that I released, was an attitude problem.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because I don't know, again, if I can teach or encourage a good attitude if it's just not there. And that can be infectious.
Yeah. So Jack, let me go to one of the questions that came in. This one's actually from Bill Stafiri. Good to have you participating on this call, Bill. But really insightful question. How do we as senior pastors discern our own fit? Who should be helping us discern our blind spots in attitude or skill? Who should help us discern if we are in the right seat on the bus?
Yeah. Bill, I have no idea. How's that? No. But the first thing that pops in my mind is I think all of us need people around. This is not an easy answer, that have the freedom to speak into our life. It doesn't have to be an official mentor / coach, even though it might not be bad to have that, someone can do that. But I do think, I just think sometimes, Doug, when I think about trust, when I trust somebody to speak into my life and tell me what maybe I don't want to hear, but I do need to hear it, it comes out of relationship. And so if I don't have those relationships in my life where there are people that can help me discern those kinds of things,
Right.
and I think we're kind of cheating ourselves. We're not helping ourselves in ministry by not having those outside voices that I can turn to for wisdom, direction, whatever we want to call it.
No.
But I don't have an easy answer to that one, for Bill. But I just think, again, it can't hurt to have those kinds of voices, those kinds of people speaking into our lives.
I hear you saying this, and I believe it as well. It's not something that we're going to easily see ourselves.
Yeah.
That our blind spots, by very definition, are spots that are blind to us.
Right.
And it's going to take someone else to be able to kind of discern that and see what's going on and speak into our lives, which then means we have to set ourselves up so that we have a relational world that invites that to happen.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that too, Doug. And it's almost in those relationships, you need to be the initiator of that. And ask the question to your counterpart to be able to speak into it, where he doesn't have to bring those up, or he doesn't have to be the initiator of that, but you ask the question and then open yourself up to that kind of direction.
Yeah.
Because I just think we need to be better at asking questions of one another about ourselves. Yeah. How do you perceive me? Do you think I am a person that manifests godly character or humility or gentleness or compassion? They're not going to say that to me and say, Jack, you suck in those areas.
No.
They're going to, but if I ask the question and open myself up to that kind of feedback, I just think you're doing yourself a favor.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say to develop that kind of culture is a challenge, but boy, it's so rewarding, if we're able to do that, because I think we tend to be so performance oriented. We want to hear the good, we want to come across as successful, and to invite those honest conversations calls for a degree of humility and security, that I think is grounded in Jesus, that takes a while to get to be honest. I'm not sure we naturally are there.
Yeah.
So Jack, why don't you review the questions for us? Go ahead.
One thing that popped in my mind, you asked me if one of these questions sticks out more than the others. You know what? There's a part of me too, Doug, there, and again, I don't want to sound like a full-blown charismatic, but I do think there's something that God gives us, and maybe it's just the practical word might be intuition. Mm-hmm. Something's there that I believe, even like that last question, how would you feel if the person quit? Yeah. You almost like sense that, and I believe the Holy Spirit speaks to you, and I don't necessarily mean that, audibly, but I believe God does do that if you're open to his leading and open to his direction. Now that sounds overly spiritual.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't.
But you know what I mean? Because I just think there's something there, Doug. And even I like those, maybe let's go back and look at the spiritual gifts test or 12 in 1 Corinthians 12. There's a gift of discernment.
Yep.
And maybe I'm misusing the term, but even when you're going through, let's say, hiring new staff, I really there's a couple people that I really would want that person to go through to get to the point before they're hired. because I believe some people are more discerning than others. And I don't mean judgmental,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, and critical, but just discerning. There's sometimes undefinable things that are coming to light that you might not even be able to put your finger on, but it just doesn't ring true.
Yeah. My wife is far more gifted and discerning than I am. And, you know, I want, when it comes to just those kinds of decisions, I want to listen to how she perceives someone, what she has to say, because she is very, very gifted in that way.
You know, it's interesting, Doug, when you think about that. One of the last steps at High Desert, historically, you know, if we're bringing on a new staff member, a new lady or a new guy, the last step is for them and their spouse to meet with Tom and his wife and my wife and me. Those were the process. You know, we'd have all the different steps, but that was the last one. And I mean this sincerely. We gave Linda and Cheryl the power of veto based on the spouse.
Okay.
And that's, I think it happened maybe twice in 35 years. And I remember one guy, I wanted that guy really bad. And
that was a veto.
And it was a veto.
Wow.
For his wife. But
we won't ask what happened to that guy, so we'll just drop that, you know. But yeah. So Jack, give us a real quick, what do you try to make as a priority? Let's say you come to the place where you're saying we need to replace him or her.
Mm-hmm.
What quick guidelines do you have for moving in that direction?
You mean steps to make that? I mean,
yeah. I mean, it's actually talking to the person. What needs to be in place before, and what do you do? How do you do that?
Yeah, the first thing I would say about that is be willing to make the hard decision. That's, you know, what you get paid the big bucks for. You know what I mean? Is to make the hard decision. And I think we need to be rigorous about that, but not ruthless. You know, and I would say be courageous, because I'm a chicken-hearted guy, you know, at heart. But I have to remind myself the church is more important than my own lack of courage, you know what I mean, for what's best for that. And honestly, if I don't have the guts to make that decision, then I probably shouldn't be in leadership. But what I would say, Doug, that's that face-to-face. And I hope there were some steps along the way to get to that point.
Okay.
But it sounds like a weasel, which is what I am. But I've always encouraged people, knowing that I am not pleased with their performance and pleased with whatever we're talking about, will, attitude, you know, values, whatever, that I think it'd be wise for them to resign.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first thing that I would cross. You know, I just think, you know, I'm to a point that I just don't think it's good for you to be here any longer. And I think the best thing for you to do professionally is to resign. And I've gone that way probably, I don't know, half a dozen times. And it's always better, I think, for the individual, and it's better for the church, because I, you know, like all leaders, I think I worry about the public relations side of it sometimes too.
Sure.
And if I can say to the world that this person felt like they needed to resign, that comes across a lot better than we had to let the person go.
Yeah. How many conversations have you had with the person on the average before you come to that decision?
Well, it has a little bit, we're kind of big. So, you know, we were big with, it would be probably.
Give us a recommended in the average TM church. How many conversations should a leader have?
I'd say 3 or 4.
3 or 4. Okay.
And we're moving in that direction, because I had 3 guys that were managing associate pastors that had their own staffs, and they were the ones recommending to me that we move in that direction. You know, so it has a little bit to do with the structure and the size and stuff like that. But, you know, there were some tough times. I remember one, Doug, I want to be careful how I say this, but, you know, Tom felt like the guy should go. We're sitting in a meeting, there's 7 pastors in this room, and he doesn't think he should go. Tom thinks he should go. And I remember saying to Tom, would you mind leaving? And Tom left. And so with the other 6 guys, I went around the room, Doug, and I said, okay, Dan, do you think he should stay or go? Not Tom, the other guy. And I went around the room, and all 5 of the guys said it's time for him to go. and he was sitting in the room with us, all 5 or 6 of us, can't remember the exact number, told him, no, it's time for you to go. That's not just Tom and Jack's decision. We all agree. Now that's kind of brutal.
Yeah.
But sometimes that kind of stuff is necessary because
brutal but clear, huh?
Very clear.
Yeah.
Because he's thinking the problem's Tom and Jack, and it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. Question from David Harris. Hey, David, good to have you on the webinar. Every leader, good or bad, has a following. How does that factor into who or when you release someone? How do you handle that within the congregation, given stringent HR laws?
Yeah, that's the truth. Well, David, it's different in Arizona. You have it better than me. But yeah, I just think, again, you have to, I think my answer would help, David, if that person resigned, where I could, go to the group of people that he supervised or his volunteers, or she might have a group of ladies, if it was a ladies pastor or ladies women's director or something, I would do that. I also tried historically to meet with that person's constituency when they were being released or let go. I just think that personal touch and that personal side of it is a good thing too, Doug, rather than just, I think sometimes we're a little bit over, what would the word be, secretive? You know what I mean? So everybody comes to church, or whatever happened to Pastor Doug? Well, no one has seen him for 6 or 8 weeks, and we don't know what the heck happened to him.
I was in this meeting with 6 other pastors, and they all told me it was time to go. So I'm not there anymore.
Yeah, but that's what it was. But, it's time to, and as crazy as that one is, I ended up helping that guy get a job at another church.
Jack, how often, this is from Art Lum. Hi, Art, good to have you on the call. How often do you do a staff review or evaluation with staff? Is it annual, semi-annual? Is that tool effective to deal with some of the issues we're talking about?
Yeah, it comes to play. But again, size-wise, I wasn't the one in the last 10 years doing much of that. But prior to that, it would be something that it was just an annual thing that Tom and I would sit down with that person. And it was very informal. How are you doing? What's happened? What do you feel like your highlights this last year are? What are some of your goals that you're thinking about this year? That kind of it was almost more conversational. I'm not a fill out the form guy, you know what I mean? And I've had roles too, Doug, in secular things, being on a school board for 19 years, evaluating the assistant superintendents and the superintendents. And I was on a board for a park district where we had a general manager. And some of that stuff was just bogus to me, you know what I mean? Yeah. And again, I think a lot of it has to do with your own comfort level, what you feel like needs to be done. But again, the thing that I would see happening, if somebody wasn't measuring up sometimes, I would see some evaluators just kind of dumping the truck all on them every 6 months or twice a year, or whatever it was, and not taking, if I see something that somebody's not doing right correctly now, I'm not going to wait a month for that sit down evaluate. I'm going to go to that young lady or that young man and say, hey, think about this. You might be a better way to do this. What the implications of this, and keep those short accounts. I don't like the dump up thing. I'll tell you a weird one. When I was on the school board, we used to have teachers that would not be reelected. That means rehired. And I remember one of them came to us in a private session of our board. That's 5 board members. And the principal said we shouldn't reelect this person. And man, I like this person. And then honestly, we did. I supported the administration. We didn't have that person come back. 2 years later, one of the board members in a neighboring school district told me the teacher that we let go became the teacher of the year in their district.
Oh. Wow.
Yeah, that stuff is nuts. Doug, you were asking too about the 3 C's. You had a question earlier.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at the time, and we about need to wrap it up. But let me say this: I think when we talk about hiring, we talk about character, competency, chemistry. Kind of call. Those are the C's that kind of can fit in. You mentioned one of the things that you began to do at High Desert, at least with certain positions, is to have that candidate meet with Tom, you and Linda, and
Yes.
then Tom and Cheryl, and give veto power there. Is there another kind of tip or two that you could give to us that would help us avoid hiring the wrong person that you kind of have learned over the years?
Yeah, well, I would say I'm not married to those three yet. Those three would come into play: the competency issue, the character issue, and the chemistry issue. Chemistry probably is at the top of the list for me.
Yeah.
But I would say even on the character side, I want more than just character. I want what I would almost call Christian experience or Christian relationship. But I would have 5 other things too, Doug. I would put in their leadership. I would put in their pastoral relational ability. I would put in their communication ability. I would even probably put passion/energy. And then it was one of David's friends and mine is a guy named Ray Johnson. And I've interviewed, I think, 6 of their last 8 campus pastors. And Ray took my advice because I'm so brilliant. But I said, I have another seed there, and that's children. Because I honestly believe this, Doug, and I'm serious about this. None of us are perfect fathers or perfect mothers. But I believe in my own heart, the best pastors I know were men that loved their wives and men that tried to be good fathers. And I mean that with all my whole heart. I'm just saying that. Perfect? No, I'm not perfect. You're not, all the guys listening in. But I think that passage in 1 Timothy 3, where it says, how can a man manage the house of God if he can't manage his own family? And I believe there's a principle there that I really believe this, and it's strong in my heart.
Yeah.
The best pastors I know are guys and gals that try to be good parents. Yeah. And perfection doesn't exist. Yeah. I'm not saying that. Yeah. But a guy that puts a high priority on his family, vacations together, dates together, trying to do all the things to keep that relationship between him and his family right. Yeah. And I'm telling you, and I would challenge everybody listening now, think about who you respect the most in your ministry years. And I would almost guarantee you that they were guys or gals that loved their spouse and tried to be good parents. How's that?
Love it. Thank you so much, Jack. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah,
thanks for spending time with us. Thank you for just your ministry and the mentor that you are to so many of us. So it's deeply, deeply appreciated. To everyone who's viewing, next week is going to be our final LeaderConnect webinar. That's a part of this spring series. We're going to take a break. We'll resume sometime around Father's Day. But we're going to be talking about succession. That's something that you're in the middle of right now up at High Desert.
Yeah.
But, how is it that a church goes about succession? And so I want to encourage you. Glenn Gunderson's going to be on the call. Glenn Myers is on the call. Mark Barguer is going to be facilitating it. It's going to be, I think, a very helpful conversation. Thank you all for being a part of this, and God bless you in the ministries that you're doing.